Aloha, and welcome to SUP FM, the podcast for stand-up paddleboarders everywhere. So with no further ado, let's get out on the water and on with the show. Here are your hosts, Nick and Simon.
Aloha, Simon. How you doing? It's a beautiful day in Portugal. I'm really excited to see who's on the show this week. Who have you been chatting to?
And a massive aloha straight back to you, Nick, from the UK, which is currently being buffeted by some horrific weather. So I haven't managed to get out on my paddleboard for a little while now. But I hope that the weather will improve in the next few days and maybe we'll have a bit of swell, who knows. But today's episode was a really fun one to record, and I hope that you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed recording it. And it answered some questions that I had around SUP touring. Now, SUP touring is a particular growth area, and one of the things that I enjoy doing when I am stuck on the beach as I am at the moment is to look ahead to the future, to sunnier days, and to think about how I'm going to use my paddleboard to the best effect. And one of the things that I haven't done as much as I'd like to is to go off on a SUP touring expedition. And the two guests that we've got on today, Will and Reuben from SUPboarder Magazine, are something of experts in this area. So it was a great opportunity to ask them the questions that I had around how I plan, what equipment I need, and what type of trips I could go into. So if you're looking to expand the use of your paddleboard when things get brighter and better, and you want to spend a bit more time out in nature, then this episode will be a fantastic guide and hopefully a real help to you as well. So I'm really pleased to welcome onto the show Reuben and Will, who are the guys behind SUPboardermag.com. Now, for those not familiar with SUPboarder, it's an awesome online resource for any level of paddler, whatever your discipline, and has masses of reviews, inspiration, and how-to videos to help you develop your SUP journey. So, guys, welcome to the pod.
Hello.
Hello.
So, as regular listeners know, we generally start by finding out about your first SUP experiences. So, Reuben, could you start by telling us about how you first came across SUP and your first experience on the water?
First came across SUP, right. Well, it was a few years ago now. Me and my wife Lucy, who also works on SUPboarder, we were doing a sort of big world tour a couple of years away, Australia, New Zealand, Baja. We were sort of kicking the backside out of it, let's say, for children and stuff. And I first saw paddleboarding in Baja. We were down there windsurfing and doing some wave sailing, and there was three guys out on this peak. So this would be in 2008, 2009, just in that sort of winter period. And I first saw paddleboarding then, and I first thought, I'm not really sure about that. But I did see him catching loads of waves, and I was like, I'm a bit interested. And then I went back. It was the following winter, we went back to New Zealand again, and then our friends had a board out there, and I went on it, and then suddenly the world opened of, I can go surfing, I can go fishing, I can do anything with this. So really for me, it was back in the winter sort of time, 2008, 2009, and then I came back to the UK that following summer, or that springtime, and then I basically contacted the Tushingham, who are the local guys who I was sort of having a small sponsorship deal for windsurfing through Starboard. And I basically said, what's the smallest paddleboard you've got? Because I was giving surfing a go in New Zealand then on a SUP. And they said, I've got a 711. I think it was Starboard 711, I think it was called then. And that was it. And I started doing some surfing and thought, this is good fun. But it was then I really sort of grasping the sort of fishing and the touring and the sort of the other side of it that I realized had this massive potential, and it was just there for the taking, for our own personal benefit, for so many people to use and do anything with. And that was the start of SUP for me. And then so when I first saw it, I wasn't really I was like, I'm not really sure. And then when I did it, I was like, it is a lot better to do than to watch, which we all know.
Exactly. And how was your first time on a board? Because it feels a bit different from a windsurfer or
Yeah,
a
I mean,
surfboard.
my background, when I left school, went to college, and I did outdoor pursuits, and I was a canoeing instructor, a kayaking instructor, sailing. I did all the sort of stuff which maybe you do when you don't know what you're quite going to do after school. And I was an instructor in those. And then obviously I'm windsurfing and surfed since I was a young kid. So jumping on the board for me was actually pretty simple. And I had the canoe strokes predominantly that really helped, not the kayaking strokes, the canoe strokes that really helped. So straight away it was paddling in a straight line and trying J strokes or brace strokes. Just transferring that stuff I'd learned from a sort of teenager onto that, and then so it was quite a quick transition. And then that's why I think for me it was within the first couple of sessions I was thinking, oh, shall I go fishing now, or shall I paddle around to the next break? Or so I was very early on looking at how I could to further my paddling experience, really.
Fantastic. And Will, how did you discover it?
Yeah, well, there was kind of a couple of sessions that probably stand out. I after uni, I studied in the southwest of the UK in Plymouth, and then after uni, I moved back to the east coast where I grew up and was doing various jobs. And the local shop there, which is Wet and Dry Water Sports, did a yearly trip down to South Wales where they'd do a bit of mountain biking and a bit of windsurfing if it all worked. And the owner of the shop, Jamie Dodds, one year. I only went this one time. He produced a starboard blend 11.2, and I was sort of told to have a go, and I had a go, and I was like, oh, this is cool. I'm catching some waves. And then shortly after that, I was a bit like Reuben. I was a bit sort of unconvinced by it, but I kind of saw some potential. A few months after that, I moved back to Plymouth to start a new job, and a friend produced some boards, and he said, oh yeah, we're all getting into this. And I suppose that was really where I got it. I was like, oh wow, I can go surfing, because I'd had that experience on the blend in Wales. And then suddenly I was sort of touring around Plymouth Sound, and which was an amazing piece of water, great for SUP touring. And suddenly I just saw, oh, I can do so many different things with this. And then shortly after, I bought myself a board and started doing some surfing. And where I'd had a bit of a funny love-hate relationship with surfing, I suddenly realised that I could progress a lot better with surfing, because I was just spending more time on waves, learning how to surf. And I just suddenly saw all the ways that this sport could go, and I was really excited by it. It was incredible, really.
So the purpose of this interview is to do a dive into SUP touring, which is something that I know that you've both had a great deal of experience of. But before we get started, could you just, either of you, just tell us about SUPboarder and what it is you do, and how what it is you do can benefit our listeners?
Yeah. Okay. Shall I go?
Yeah,
Will,
you go.
Will's pointing to me. I'll start rambling on. Well, our first thing the reason it started SUPboarder is it was quite interesting, because me and Will, obviously, we knew each other from windsurfing before, and we were at this. I remember it vividly. We were at this pub once after having a windsurf, and we were like, "Yeah, windsurfing's good." And then we both got onto this conversation about paddleboarding, and then we were like, "Oh yeah, windsurfing's good, but like paddleboarding and surfing and the potential." And then in this sort of comment, a semi-serious comment from me, because I sort of had this thing in the background about having a website or a magazine resource, let's say, about paddleboarding, because there wasn't really anything there. But I said to Will, why don't we start a magazine? Why don't we start an online website which helps people promote paddleboarding in such an epic way that we're all loving it at the moment? And then Will basically just like, yeah, okay, well, yeah, and he was just. And from that point onwards, obviously, it was a lot more work and a lot more chats and board meetings, paddling together, discussing it. But that is how we started SUPboarder, because we were just so enthused by this epic sport that we needed to share and inspire other people to take up this and change their lives.
Well, I suppose we were looking, weren't we, for a magazine that was sharing particularly videos and helping us get inspired. And we realised that it wasn't there, and we were kind of like, well, if it's not there, why don't we just try and pull something together?
Yeah, and at that rate, starting a website and a magazine is easy, Simon. That was
Absolutely.
the early days. We were like, yeah, this is epic. And anyway, it was a couple of years later, and then well, it wasn't even that. It was probably a year later. We started SUPboarderMag.com, or what we call it, just SUPboarder, and it's pretty much there to inspire people, educate people to go out paddling, whether you're a first-time paddleboarder or improve your paddle technique, to just give you the best experience and the best kit for you possible out there. That's basically all it's for. It's just for the paddlers, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a massive breadth of content on there, and covering all disciplines, including a bit of foiling, I notice as well. This is something that sort of interests me. How are you engaging with that, Will? I think you've both been doing that, haven't you?
Yeah, we've been doing quite a lot of foiling for a few years now, and yeah, we love it. It's really nice. Sort of add on to paddleboarding, and we've been doing a lot of the wing surfing, wing foiling as well. And I suppose you could argue that that's not paddleboarding, but it's kind of an extension of paddleboarding, and our readers seem to love the content we're producing on it. So we keep plugging away at it, really, and it's a really nice. I suppose there's so many areas that you can go paddleboarding, so many disciplines, so much different types of equipment you can get into. There isn't a day that goes past that you can't do something on the water, really.
Exactly.
It's just a shame we have to write emails and do that type of stuff.
I know. I think producing this podcast, I've never done less paddleboarding, I think, since I've been doing this, but which I'm sure is a story familiar to you. But let's get on to our main topic of today, which is touring and exploration, areas which you both had a huge amount of experience of. So again, that's an area with huge diversity. Exploration could be a day trip, a couple of hours, or it could be a multi-day mission. So coming to you first of all, Will, I know you've been on a few epic circumnavigations and journeys. What I'd really be interested in finding out is a bit of a taste of some of those trips. So tell us a bit about Ibiza, because you circumnavigated the island with a very experienced crew. Was that your first sort of epic journey?
Yeah. I mean, it's quite an interesting story, really, how I got into it, because it was I did the trip around Ibiza with Kiko Matthews and Charlie Head. Charlie had just returned from the Amazon, where he was doing a Red Bull TV documentary over 3 months, and they had a big production crew out there, and I think it's still available on Red Bull TV. But he wanted kind of a bit of a wind down trip, so he said, let's just have a little holiday paddling for a week around Ibiza. And Kiko just sort of asked me on the off chance, am I up for it? I had very, very little experience of let's say sort of lightweight, compact adventures. So I was completely out of my comfort zone, and I was sort of, that sounds fun. Let's do it. The flight was super cheap. Ibiza sounded like a really amazing place from what I looked at, and a few months later, I was on a plane going out there, and it was pretty cool.
Fantastic. And there's sort of a review and information on SUPboarder clearly, but looked like an epic journey, sleeping in caves, lots of campfires.
Yeah, we were completely we didn't even have a gas cooker, so that trip was really because Charlie wanted it to be as hard as possible. We were collecting wood and cooking on fires, which for me, coming, I was a scout and I was a cub, so I'd experienced that type of camping type stuff. I'm familiar with it, but I suppose the kind of living in that sort of really compact way and going on an adventure was pretty new to me. So I got thrown in the deep end, but I finished the trip and I was completely hooked. I was just, my head was exploding with ideas of things that I could do and the way that I would like to do trips and where I'd like to paddle and things like that.
And was that trip self-supported? Did you bring all your food with you? I mean, I know Reuben's a bit of a fisherman. Did you catch your own fish when you went round there?
Fish, not yet.
Sorry?
Have you caught a fish yet? Yeah, you have actually. So
I have.
Different story, different time.
No, we didn't catch our own fish or anything like that. But we'd taken quite a lot of expedition food. But we were just quite limited in terms of, we weren't going out and eating at cafes and restaurants. We'd paddle all day, get to our camp spot, and just settle down with some delicious expedition food, really. And there was probably never enough of it, because I think it was just the leftovers from Charlie's expedition, which he'd eaten most of it already.
All the good stuff.
I remember the first night of that trip, we landed at Ibiza airport, and I had no idea what was going on, really. And Charlie just said, "Okay, we're going to get a taxi to this spot." And it was completely pitch black when we arrived at this beach, which was going to be a good start point. And we just rolled out our sleeping bags and slept there, and I had no idea where I was. But it was okay, because I think we'd bought a big bottle of whiskey in the airport, so had a little bit of that, and straight away I was into the expedition kind of thing, and it felt good, so I just stayed with it. I didn't really have a choice.
Obviously, a big thing around expeditions and touring is the planning. So would it be fair to say on that particular expedition, you, Charlie, had kind of worked out the details? What was your role there?
Well, I suppose I just packed a bag of everything I thought I might need, and then we spent half a day really prepping kit and making sure that we weren't doubling up on stuff when we all met the day before in London. So there's always loads of planning to do, and you've got to think pretty carefully about what you need. And probably that's one of the hardest things about doing an expedition, is knowing what you need, making sure your team have got everything to keep you, safe and fed and watered and all that type of stuff. But yeah, I suppose I was pretty new to it, but there's a few different guys who were on it and who all had varying levels of experience, and we kind of all clubbed together and worked as a team.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. And how did that differ from your Menorca experience? Because again, that was a circumnavigation. I know Menorca fairly well. It's a lovely place to paddle round. You did that with a couple of friends.
Yeah. So once I'd done the Ibiza trip, I was obviously really hooked on it. And in between, I did a trip across. I did the Caledonian Canal over 3 days. I think a couple, maybe the year after, and the year up. So it was a couple of years between these trips. I did Menorca, and it was because I kind of wanted to. Well, Kiko sums up really well in the video of the Ibiza trip. You paddle around an island, you get this sort of 360 degrees of experiences. You paddle around the next corner, you don't quite know what you're going to see, and then you've got that really tangible goal at the end of it. You've paddled around and you've had to do it in a time period. But I suppose I was a lot more experienced by the time I did the Menorca expedition. I knew a little bit more about what kit we needed. We did a lot of planning up front for several months, just to make sure that we were all up to speed and everyone knew what they wanted to get out of it. And I suppose to some extent I led the expedition a little bit more. There was lots more challenges in terms of the weather and the conditions that we were paddling in, and we had to just make sure everyone was happy and safe to continue. So and my experience, I could pass on my experience to maybe less experienced members of the group, which felt good. I suppose I'd seen that I'd learned quite a lot from it, really.
Absolutely. And any time you're on the water, every day's a school day, isn't it? So,
yeah.
So and you mentioned about the Caledonian trip. So that was from one side to the other of Scotland. Scotland is a great place to cut your teeth on these sorts of expeditions. How long did that take you to do?
So I did that over 3 days, and again, after doing the trip with Kiko and Charlie, I was just really sold on the idea of SUP expedition, and I'd had my eye on the Caledonian Canal for a long time, really. Lots of people had done it before, and it's a really well set up adventure, but I just never managed to do it. And I had this big thing that I wanted to do it with some close friends, but it never really worked out. And I was trying to persuade Kiko or Charlie to do it, but at that time she was planning on trying to row across the Atlantic, so she wasn't really interested in doing any paddleboarding at that time. She needed some oars rather than a paddle. But I actually, I remember the conversation. I was sort of a bit miserable because I wanted to do it with some people, and she said, "Well, why don't you just do it on your own?" And I was like, "Well, I can't possibly do it on my own." And that whole thing, then I kind of got set on that I would do it on my own, and actually that became a complete new learning experience, because solo adventuring is again a slightly different thing. But I think reflecting on it, it was an amazing experience, and now I really relish in solo things. Really, I quite like spending time on my own, and it was probably a really good personal development thing for myself. Really, learning how to be with myself and enjoy it. Really, yeah, I do a lot of solo sailing now, so and I love it. I'd rather go solo sailing than sailing with other people.
Never takes me.
I mean, it really taps into the whole sort of meditative aspect of stand-up paddleboarding. I mean, obviously, lots been said about mental health and its benefits in that direction. So certainly, I can see the attraction of, paddling, and obviously through that stunning nature through the locks. I hope that the wind was blowing in the right direction for you.
Yeah. Well, I picked the route based on knowing which way the wind was going to go, and we're lucky to be able to get really good weather forecasts now, and had some fantastic downwinding, and there's a 4-part sort of vlog series on SUPboarder. I've vlogged the whole thing, and it kind of gives you a bit of insight into the journey that I was going through, really, because it was probably one of the first times in about 5 years that I just stopped and I turned off my phone, and I had some cameras there and bits and pieces, but I didn't look at a phone or look at emails, and that was a really good, from a reflective point of view, to just sort of I don't know just to sort of come back and be like, oh yeah, I came back with a real sort of fresh, invigorating sort of outlook on where I wanted to go next.
Absolutely. And those videos I'd highly recommend, and we'll link to those in the show notes. And there's also quite a substantial piece of how-to in there, quite apart from the inspirational stuff. So absolutely outstanding. And Reuben, of course, you bit off what's probably the Everest of touring experiences, which is to take your family off for an overnight expedition. How was that?
The Everest, I like that. Well, I've only got one child at the moment. That helps a lot. But no, it was, to be honest, it was absolutely incredible. I mean, it was one of the best experiences I've ever done in my life, and I've done a lot of. I'm lucky that I've gone out and searched these epic experiences, but doing it with a family it's different to, like what Will was saying, your solo. The solo adventure is incredible and it pushes you, but when you realize you are changing or helping or progressing somebody's life, like Lucy, my wife, like Lucy's, or Izzy, or our little girls, it's sort of, it's incredible. It's just a phenomenal feeling, and it's so nice to see that enjoyment. But for it wasn't really a mammoth. Didn't feel like a mammoth task. It didn't feel like, possibly because a few things. We knew the route that we were doing. We planned with the weather. We knew our exit routes. It may look in the video like I'm a bit like, "Hey, just get on with it." I never camped in my life, which I haven't really. But the actual safety side of it is there, and it's all thought out. And we don't take the risks that we don't. You don't want to put yourself or definitely your family into. But it was an incredible experience to see something like that affect, especially a young child. Just some phenomenal experience that she hopefully will want to do again and again, and also encourage her friends to do it with their parents, which is the biggest thing that we've noticed from and the responses of the video. We did that blog not as any means. I'm not personally likes to share stuff. I don't go on Facebook. I'm like an anti. Will calls me. It's funny. I'm like the most social, unsocial person, because I've got this massive social presence, but actually I'm not a real. This is what I'm doing today. This is what I'm doing today. And we did that video just to really, hopefully, inspire people to realize they can do this with a family, a small family. And it doesn't, like you said earlier, it doesn't have to be a weekend. It could be an afternoon. It can be an hour, but it can be done, and it should really be done and encouraged.
Yeah. And the really important thing there is, coming back to it again, is the planning. And this is certainly something that we've seen from all of our guests who've gone on sort of small or large expeditions, because potentially you're quite exposed on a stand-up paddleboard. There is a huge amount of underpinning information you really need to get to. Just going out in the hope that it's going to be okay is not not a sustainable strategy. So we'll talk a little bit about the planning a bit later on. But I was very impressed by the kit that you brought out there. I think you had everything. You had the cold beers, you had the Cornish pasties. It seems like the front end of the journey was almost entirely driven by pasties,
It was, yeah.
and a beautiful spot, and also we were of course privileged in the video to see Izzy's first wave. So
that actually it's sort of things that pop up that we don't, you shouldn't plan. Well, yeah, you should plan everything, but at the same time, you shouldn't. If it happens like that, and the wave was perfect, and she wanted to give it a go, and I think that's the one thing I will say with kids is just take your time with them. Don't force them to do anything, and make everything as fun as you can, and they will. And stop as regularly as you can, and they will want to be a part of it. But as soon as you start saying we've got to keep going, which is really hard with the journey, if you want to meet a certain point from a safety point of view, so maybe don't plan that out as far. We'll talk about planning in a bit, but yeah, just take your time with kids. But it is amazing to watch and have them along.
So into the sort of nuts and bolts of touring. So as a touring newbie, there's clearly a huge variety of different models of touring and exploration that can happen. We've already mentioned the sort of the multi-day versus sort of single hour, I guess, type trips that you can go on. So, but if we sort of expand it to say an overnight, that would be sort of, I guess, one of the main commitments that people make when they go out touring for the first time. What are the sort of options, or what sort of variations do you think of that overnight are there available to do if you're looking at it from a very top level down?
Will, do you want to go on that?
Yeah. Well, I think we tried to define what touring was in a series that we did last summer. And really, it could just be going round the corner, pushing yourself slightly further than you might have gone already, and seeing something new. It doesn't have to be overnight, like you quite rightly say. And I think in that piece, when I say what is SUP touring, we talk about how you could go overnighting, but it doesn't have to mean that you have to carry your own camping kit. You could just paddle to a B&B or a hotel, on a canal, and do a slightly more luxury version of SUP touring. But and then of course you've got the side which is about camping, and means that you have to carry more equipment, you have to have more equipment. You have to do a bit more planning, but actually, probably I look forward to the camping bit to some extent more than the paddling bit, because I really like that side of it.
So let's talk a little bit about the actual equipment itself. Do you need a specialist touring board to go touring?
No.
Oh, absolutely not. No.
My last touring, I didn't do it on a specialist touring board, was it? It was an 11-foot by 32-inch all-round board. Yeah. And I chose that because I knew that it could take a lot of equipment. I mean, the stuff...
He wanted to take his toolbox, Simon.
Exactly. I mean, the thing is, the difference between Will and me is that I go, right, what am I taking on the journey? And when I mean what am I taking, I mean, am I taking my spearfishing stuff? Am I taking my fishing stuff? Am I taking my snorkel? I'm thinking like that. Will's like, I'll take a tent and all that sort of stuff. And I'm thinking about toys around it. Like Izzy's like, can I take my bodyboard? I'm like, no, we can't take your bodyboard. We're going SUP touring, So for me, it's my vessel and my board is much more less about speed. It's more about, equipment carrying capabilities. So you do not need a touring board, but there are so many advantages to having a nice board to paddle, especially, and this is a big one, if the weather doesn't go the way you think it is. So for instance, while our family touring trip, we were doing a light downwinder all the way. So we didn't really have to paddle. We could have just drifted down there. Mm-hmm. But if I was going on a longer touring with a changeable forecast, and I knew the wind could maybe come on my head, on my nose, I wouldn't really want to be on a slower all-round board. I want to be on a board with a bit more length. But Will's used lots of different touring boards. I mean, what do you think, Will?
Yeah, I think I like going fast. I like having a board that's going to do the job. And so if I've got a chance of a downwinder, I want it to be able to perform downwinder. if I want to be able to pack it up, I'd choose the inflatable. But I like to. I suppose I like to be really efficient. A lot of the jobs that I've done in the past are all about driving efficiency. So I want to know that I'm being efficient with the things that I'm taking. That's just a sort of personal thing. But yeah, you can tour on absolutely anything. And when we get questions, ask the experts questions through SUPboarder Pro, often when someone wants to get into SUP touring, we sort of say, well, and they ask, what board should I get? We ask them questions about, well, what type of touring do you want to do? Because the discipline of touring is so wide. It's what I want to do is very different to what Reuben wants to do. So it's going to be, there's going to be loads of different people wanting loads of different things. And when you start out, you can do it on your 10.6 by 32, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But it will give you the taste. I think the thing about doing that is it gives you the taster to think, oh, I am going to get into touring. I want to go further. I want a faster board. And then you can choose whether you opt in, so you haven't got to change. You haven't got to buy your touring board to go touring and spend all that money at the first place, which is definitely a good move. Because at the end of the day, for all of us, that's what SUPboard is always about. It's making sure you buy the best kit for you. And I've never said you have to buy this board is the only one that does this job, because that's total rubbish. They all do pretty much. I mean, when I first started SUP fishing, I started SUP fishing on my starboard 711 because that was the board I had, and it was absolutely useless. And I was underwater and it was really hard and I fell off all the time, but I still caught fish and I still loved it, and it still made me realize that I need a bigger board.
Exactly. So the eternal truths about stand-up paddling, which is, and you won't know this, Reuben, because you're not on Facebook, but the eternal question is, which board should I get? Which, of course, is an incredibly elastic question. And also I always need one more board than I've actually got, which is the other great truth. But you're absolutely right. It's all about trying a sport. You don't need or trying a discipline before you actually buy the specialist kit for it. I mean, I've got a Mistral all-rounder inflatable that I've had for a few years, and that's taken me into everything, downwinding, surfing, touring, even a little bit of racing. And it's not the best board for either, but it's given me a decent taste and a real appetite for all of those other disciplines. So it's just about how you get into it. So in terms of safety, obviously safety's a big thing. There was, the inevitable incident, I think, recently with, I think, a fatality down in, I think it was Devon or Cornwall. Down in Cornwall recently. But in terms of safety and that sort of, first of all, in terms of pre-planning, what would I be looking at and looking for as a touring newbie?
I think you have to think about the planning. So if you're taking yourself around the corner into a new environment, you need to try and, I suppose, be risk aware. So think about things that could go wrong because you're going further. What happens if the wind changes? You've just got to understand some of those risks and try and do your own personal risk assessment. And we cover quite a lot in that, and how to plan a SUP touring exploring expedition. But you've got to try and understand you've got to know some of your current unknowns, if that makes sense, by become aware of some of those risks. You've got to push yourself. If you want to push yourself and you want to get into SUP touring, you might have to do some things that you don't quite, it's outside of your comfort zone. But the challenge is to learn what could go wrong. So having a good understanding of the weather, the tides, currents. If you're looking at doing coastal paddling, you've got to be very aware of some coastal tidal effects, and do your research, and then make sure that you've got the equipment that if you do get into trouble, you can raise the alarm. And the absolute best thing to do that everyone's got is a mobile phone. But you can go a lot further than that with VHF radios and personal locator beacons and all sorts of stuff. But there's absolutely loads that you can do, and I think you just have to do your research, ask questions, ask people who are more experienced.
Yeah, definitely. And I just push on what Will says. It's just the weather is the paddleboarder's problem.
Yeah.
If there was no wind every day, and it was flat, calm, we could paddle anywhere we wanted to.
Yeah.
But it's never like that, and unless you're in certain nice little islands. But I was in even the islands you paddle around, Will, they're not like that. But so if I was going to give any one big tip, it's just understand the weather wherever you're paddling really well, and just understand the map, the lie of the land. Where does it look? And just and like Will says, your exit routes. If you can plan an exit route every 200 meters, if something goes wrong, I'll get out here, something I'll get out here. Then and you're staying close to shore, then paddle, it is incredibly safe, in that sense. And you haven't got to. You can go around the corner. Yes, you might have to walk when you're on land. You might have to hitch a lift and all that sort of stuff. But you've got to think about these risks in the greater scale and how bad they really are. And if you're on the land, it's okay. But knowing your weather and knowing your route and the map, the area you're paddling in well, is definitely the biggest point to anything. So if you do start in your local area and you do know it obviously you've got a leg up, and it's already easier for you to understand and work out your route, which is definitely one of the biggest things.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's about talking to other people. It's about doing research online, and following videos like the ones that you've got up. You can learn from all of those experiences and from other people's experiences directly.
Yeah.
So at the moment, as we speak, Jordan Wiley's doing his paddle around Britain, and he's obviously an incredibly gritty guy, years in the forces, and I suppose he's the real example of how weather can really take a toll on touring plans. He's clearly very well planned up, but he's had a particularly tough time covering the south coast of Britain. How closely have you been following his trip?
I'm fairly closely. I dabble in and out just for my, because all the videos and the other content we're making, we're all over the place. But I do know, and I haven't known, and also like Charlie Head is another one. He's very much an early grit pioneer, sort of just get on with it sort of guy, which is the way you have to be to do that sort of adventure. And I think the problem with the UK waters is it's a nightmare for wind, tide, conditions. Everything is against us, isn't it, Will? That piece of water is just not good.
Yeah. I think there's so many challenges. The tide, we deal with quite a huge amount of tide. The weather changes quite rapidly. He's got around some of the more challenging bits, but he's certainly got some big challenges still to come. But it's an awesome. These adventures are great because they really get into the mass media as well, and so people see that paddleboarding can be something that you can have a good adventure with. And a lot of people see paddleboarding as that's not for me. It's not going to be exciting. It's all about paddling round in circles on a lake in bikinis. But actually, there's so much more to the sport if you want to take it. And I think that there's something exciting for even the most full power adventure junkie with paddleboarding, really. And trips like Jordan's help people see that.
Absolutely, definitely. I mean, we came in because both me and Will were quite, full on windsurfy, wave saily. I'm a bit addicted to anything that's sort of water and fast and high but paddleboarding fits it perfectly. I love it. It just works. It works. It has that massive adventure appeal, and you can push it if you want, or you can, like you say, paddle around in circles. But yeah, just
going through the sort of tick list of things that touring newbies would want to know about, or at least to be introduced to. And you've mentioned some of this stuff already. Planning your route, obviously, absolutely essential. So you talked about exit points and so on. What other considerations would you need to make when you're planning your route?
I'll say one, Will. If you're paddling with others, make sure you are a similar level, or you are willing to wait for that slowest paddler. That's a basic one, but it's such a key one that I've seen people sometimes go off across the bay and safely, but then their third paddler will be 150 meters behind the group, and then it gets further and further and further. And then, so make sure if you are paddling with others, you're a similar level and you're willing to paddle to the slowest paddler.
Yeah, when we've done some of the trips, the longer trips around Menorca, which was a 7-day trip, there was a lot of expectation setting really before we even set off, that you can apply to even the most simple paddleboarding adventure. And we all knew that we all had to understand each other's ability and know where particular parts of the trip were going to be slower for some, and how we all needed to stick together and support each other through that. So yeah, it's a trip like that is real teamwork, really.
Yeah.
It's not, on the face of it, you won't think, well, how's going, all individually paddling, but I remember the end of that trip, I was shot. Like on day 7, we had a long upwind paddle, and I was done, and I was really suffering with sore shoulders and things, and the rest of the team, they waited for me and pulled me through that, and at other times, I'd helped other people, get through things that were challenges for themselves.
Yeah. And I suppose another tip, if we're talking tips for newbies or anybody, is tell people. So tell your friends where you're going, what you're doing. Tell some other friends what you're doing, where you're going. Tell the local Coast Guard. Phone them up. Say, I'm planning on doing a route from here to here. I will have these exit points. Tell everybody, because I have this thing of when I see people, changing the subject slightly, but going downwinding offshore and they're miles out to sea, and they'll see 2 very competent paddlers paddling fine, no problem at all, but people on the beach, on the cliff, on the road see this and then suddenly panic, and then they phone the Coast Guard. But if the Coast Guard has that phone call, oh no, there are 2 people paddling around this coast at this time, I think they're fine. They do not need assistance because they've called me. So definitely telling people, as when you first, all stages of paddling, is a very good thing to do, except maybe if you're literally going from 10 feet off of one beach to another, maybe you might not need to. But if it's more about the confidence in yourself, that if you want to tell others and get feedback from others, from professionals, the Coast Guard are a prime example of that. So definitely I would advise telling people.
Yeah, I think just don't push yourself too hard. I mean, the very first SUP camping expedition I did, and we don't have to be camping, but I paddled out of a place in South Devon, and I literally paddled probably half a mile around the corner, parked up on the beach, and spent the evening there. And because there was so much to learn about the camping piece, I didn't need to go paddling far. I needed to know how I was going to get all the equipment together. So keep it really simple. And that trip, I actually wrote about that trip, I think.
You did, yeah.
It was about how you could go just around the corner and you could have this amazing time. And I hadn't gone very far from home. And, that's just why SUP Adventure is so exciting.
Like you said, it's the packing, it's the camping, it's the getting stuff, it's cooking stuff on the stove, it's making a fire. It's that sort of stuff which you do not do in your normal life when you're sat in front of your computer worrying about what Instagram post you're watching. It's like, just forget about all that. Just get out there, just get back to nature, however you want to do it, and just reset yourself.
Exactly. It's all of that micro adventure stuff, isn't it? Which is
you really don't have
incredible.
You don't have to go far.
And just coming back to your point about the Coast Guard, I think it's particularly appropriate for downwinding because intuitively, if people from the shore see someone out in a X mile an hour wind, they think that they're in distress. And I know that there was a couple of very experienced paddle boarders. This is sort of not stand-up paddle boarders, I don't think, but they were down there in Cornwall and they got intercepted. And I've had something similar down here, and the Coast Guard are actually reaching out more to certainly local paddle groups to find out more about the sport, because clearly they don't want any of those sorts of false alarms if they can possibly avoid them.
I mean, we're starting to work with the RNLI, and we're starting to try and, because they need educating as much as
exactly
in sport, like you're saying. So but at the same time, a lot of this the worst thing is if you're okay, I'm all right, I can paddle from there to there, and you can, but you have to tell people that you are doing it, because they will panic, and then they will send out a rescue team, and then it will cost £20,000, and you'll be like, what's that achieved? So it's just a simple thing. And at the same time, by you doing that and say, I'm paddling from this location to this location, it's going to take me 2 hours, I've got a tailwind of 15 knots, they'll understand that you're educating at that point. You are telling them about this is what's capable of paddleboarding in. Winging is another one. Like, me and Will are starting to get wing foiling off the beach in the waves, but we're already starting to think, right, could we go for a mammoth wing foil downwind, a big one? But the Coast Guard, they're going to see these new people, especially when you're on a foil or a wing. Is it a windsurfer? Is it a kite surfer in distress? They don't know what it is. It's a recipe for rescue written all over you, even though you're absolutely fine and nothing wrong. So it's very important to educate even the surfers.
I think, and there's probably a lot. There's I don't think it's very clear how you have to engage in, who do you call the Coast Guard to let you know? Is it got to be local? And I think that's some of the things that we're starting to think, having seen what's going on or has happened this year, big boom in the sport in Europe, and lots of people getting into it who don't maybe understand some of the risks. And we're trying to figure out, well, how can we reach more of those people? We reach a huge amount of people through the website already, but how can we get to people more effectively to help them understand what the risks are? Because as long as you're risk aware, you shouldn't be getting any problems. You just got to make sure people understand the things, and who do I contact? Who do I ask a question to? And those type of things. And we've got some things going on that we're going to try and help that for next year. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a difficult conversation to have. I think this obviously is an adventure sport, and a lot of people who get into it haven't had any water sports experience, so they don't intuitively understand the risk, and they just go out and hope for the best. But I think that there's a lot of initiatives. Obviously, I mean, we're also sort of working quite hard on that safety aspect, just to get a bit of consistent information, because all of the safety information tends to be in bits and pieces and all over the place, and some of it's of variable value. I mean, I know down here we've got a very new paddleboarding contingent. Some of the advice that goes out on Facebook groups is just absolutely frightening, and usually given by someone who has the best intentions but has only been paddling for 6 months. So
I think that's some of the problem, isn't it? Anybody can be a complete expert behind the front of an online community like a Facebook group or a forum, and that's what we always try to make sure that we've got a good understanding of it ourselves, so we can share that, and we can be a very valuable source of information where there's lots of potentially not particularly well-backed information going out. So there's a lot of people who will probably read it and think, oh, that's fine, brilliant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good stuff. Well, I could quite happily talk about safety all day, but let's bring ourselves back onto touring. So in terms of kit, we've talked a bit about the board. If I was, say, camping overnight, what are the sort of options there? I mean, obviously everything's sort of related to what sort of climate you're living in, and seeing as I guess in the UK we've got quite a varied climate, I guess we need to work through a variety of choice. So what sort of things, Will, would you bring out, let's say on your Scotland trip? What did your overnight kit look like?
Oh, well, it's to be honest with you, it's usually pretty similar whether you're going on one overnight out compared to 7. You basically take the same kit, because you need, I like a bit of luxury, so I don't bivvy. I prefer to go in a tent, which means that you're carrying a little bit more volume, a little bit more weight. But if it rains, you're not getting dripped on the face. And I suppose I always make sure I've got plenty of clothes, lots of layers. I generally have a really big down jacket that I might take even in the height of summer, because it always gets much colder than you imagine when you're outside, even in the summer. There's huge amounts of information on the vlogs I did of the Scotland trip, but also in our What to Take paddleboarding series, and on SUP touring and things like that. But clothing, shelter, and we break it up into all those different areas. I'm probably not answering your question.
It's so big. That's the problem.
Well, it's a massive question. It's a massive question.
So there's a video on SUPboarder that says what to take SUP touring, and if everyone watches that, then you'll have a pretty good idea. Some of the best things, probably the best things that I take would be that down jacket, just because I hate being cold, and I'll always take a waterproof, even if it's not saying it's going to rain, because that waterproof will give me wind protection, even if it doesn't rain. And I'm pretty geeky about the different bags that I take for different purposes, because I want to go out and I want to have a nice night's sleep in a dry sleeping bag and a dry tent. I don't want that dry bag to have got all my gear wet because it didn't quite work. So I have lots of different bags and there's a sort of a logic behind why I do that. So I'll have a main bag that's full of equipment in individual dry liners, that type of stuff really. And I suppose I've just learned the way I like doing it over the years. It works for me. It might not work for others, but I think it's a good starting point, and then you can find out what works for you, and tweak what we do. So there's lists of information online about how I would pack for a SUP adventure, and people should look at that.
I was going to say the costs. You can either spend a lot of money on tents, sleep bags, and thermarests and stuff. I mean, I'm the sort of person that Will's got like all the gear, and I got no idea. No, I know a little bit. I mean, I can get by, but I'm a bit more of a. There's some amazing kit out there now, and yes, it can cost you hundreds and hundreds of pounds, or you can do it with a bivvy bag and have. But I think the most important thing is making sure you're comfortable for that evening, and it goes back to planning the weather. And if it is going to be a rain, like Scotland's the prime one, you're going to get wet, aren't you? There's going to be rain at some point. So, and definitely the small one. I always think go on Will's puffer jacket one. They're great as a pillow then, because I can't sleep without. I have to have a pillow of some sort, and having something, extra clothes, use a pillow is just a simple tip that really definitely makes a difference.
Those inflatable pillows just don't seem to work. Mine always deflate, or I end up with my face stuck to the wrong side or something like that. So
the pillow thing is always a funny one for me, because I get a bit grumpy if I haven't got the right pillow, and I've tried so many different things, and I actually take my own pillowcase from home, because
I do that.
The texture on my face, you see, Simon.
Stuff
it full with anything I've got there, and an inflatable not an inflatable PFD, a normal buoyancy aid is quite a good base as a pillow as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've slept on an ice up before. Actually, I've done that, but it has to be warm, because that will take the heat out of you. That cold sleeping on a big thick, and you don't want it pumped that hard, because it's like sleeping on the land.
Exactly.
You got to deflate it, and then you got to make sure you pump it up in the morning, everything. But there is so much kit out there, and there is some phenomenally good reviews externally to SUP about tents and stuff. But we are starting to do a lot more of that actually now on SUPboard, because we realise a lot of you guys are out there want to know what's the best. I'm like a prime when it's the stove cooking. I didn't have a clue. I know that you have a thing and you put a gas ball and how it comes, but I didn't realise there's all these different types and jet boils and these and that. And that sort of stuff is phenomenal now. The speed, isn't it? Where you can cook, make water and hot, and make prawns jump out the fire and everything. It's just
there's so many different kit options, and it's just finding the right thing and what works. But ultimately, you've got to understand it's like our SUPboarder reviews. You've got to understand the pros and the cons of a product to understand whether it works for what you're wanting to do. So, do you want to be able to just boil water? Well, jet boil is going to do the job well. If you want to cook eggs on a jet boil, it's not going to work out too well. It's just about getting information and understanding pros and cons.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think the other thing, just the flip side of it, is not to get too obsessed by the quality of the kit. I mean, when I spoke to Lizzie Carr, she basically paddled from south to north on the canal network with, I think, an alloy paddle and just a very, I mean, you do not need, all singing, all dancing kit. It just needs to be, as you said, sort of, practical and do the business.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, on the Scotland trip, I used I had some very basic, quite inexpensive kit. So I was in a 2-man tent that was, I think about £75, and pretty basic stuff, but just compact enough to be able to get into my dry bags. But you spend 3-4 times that much on a tent. You save a few kilos and a little bit of volume, but the benefit isn't huge. It's a nice to have. You can SUP tour on a real budget.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's just getting out there. Until you get out on the water, until you've spent the night wild camping or whatever, you don't really know the relative benefits of each piece of kit. So it's just getting your hands on. You can do all of this stuff in theory. It's about getting out there and doing it, which is the important thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In terms of sort of advice to newbies or any sorts of tourers, is there anything here that we haven't covered which you think is sort of particularly crucial to an enjoyable touring experience?
Take lots of water. You always underestimate how much water you need. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, I'd definitely.
A good hat, and sun cream, because you know, if you're in a sunny climate like your trips abroad, Will, you need a good hat. You're going to fry, sunstroke, and then you're in a really bad place. You want to keep hydrated, sun creamed up, hat, keep covered up. That would be my advice, and lots of water. Yeah. Then you can think. Then your decisions are clear, and everything. It all comes back to water and hydration. It's very important. Food is important, but hydration is even more important, I would say.
Yeah. Water is a really interesting one. It can be quite hard to find water, and I think you just have to think about what could go wrong because of what I'm doing, and so you don't always have to take a pump. I don't always take a pump if I'm touring on an SUP, but just think, well, if I took that pump, then it means that if this happens, or if you've got a puncture, you could solve it. But if you knew that you weren't going to be far from home, and if it all went wrong, you could still get away, then fine. You just got to think about the risk and try and go that way. Reuben's got a good story about puncturing SUPs when SUP touring.
Have I?
Yeah.
Oh, I want to say that one.
Sorry?
Did I say that one?
Well, you have to now.
I have to now. That is separate. It basically involves fish and sharp fishing spikes and a board that got a.
But not hooks.
No.
Fish.
It was actually. And the funny thing was, I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll put the fish on the front of the board before I release it. Take a photo, because the readers will have that. Put the fish on the front of the board. It flipped over. Oh dear! I've just put myself into it. Anyway, I just put a roof rack strap around it and fixed it pretty quick. Proper heat from. But no, fish, spiky fish for you fishermen out there. Not fishing hook, fish. Yeah. It's so much fun to have. So many adventures you do. You need a little bit of risk. That's the whole thing, really. Unfortunately, I know that some of you might go, "Oh no, you can't." But you need to have a little bit of. I'm not saying punch your ball with a fish, but I'm saying you need to have that little bit of. You need to plan your journey, but you also need to accept the fact that you have got a risk, and that is what makes it feel even more enjoyable, isn't it?
And it's the risks that that push us, and that make it that grow us as individuals. So, we did. There's a short documentary about half an hour long called Days of Opportunity on the Menorca circumnavigation, and a lot of that is talking about the challenges that we had in terms of the environmental challenges, the weather, the wind, and the struggles that wasn't because of bad planning. It was risky stuff, but we could get around it. But that's overcoming those problems were what made so amazing. And we don't talk about the good stuff, we talk about the challenges probably when we all get together after that trip now.
Exactly, and that's where the experience comes in, doesn't it? And but it's a question of dialing that risk up gradually rather than sort of going for the really big risks. So it's about knowing where your levels are and then just pushing over it, and that's where your experience and your tools grow.
Yeah, definitely.
So obviously we're in a slightly restrained situation at the moment. We're all kind of locked down to varying different degrees. So obviously there's a lot of...
from Will at the moment.
Sorry?
Waving at him across the room, I am, Will.
I think you probably class as one household or whatever they call it. But in terms of the future and when all of this sort of stuff finishes and you get the prospect to sort of release and go out and do an exploration, go out on an adventure, multi-day trip, where would be your sort of fantasy location to go and do that if money was no object?
Go on, Will. You've probably got one already.
Oh, see, I'm kind of getting into this thing where I actually quite like the idea of just doing stuff really close to home. I know that sounds really sort of rubbish, but I'm really enjoying finding like places really close to home that I think give me more than I've ever thought. So I'm not dreaming about going anywhere amazing. I'm thinking about what can I do just around the corner so I can do it every week rather than just have to think about doing it once or a year or once every other year. It sometimes makes me feel a little bit lame.
No. Well, do you know what? Well, you either go broad, so you go lots of locations, or you go deep and really get to know whatever areas you're operating in. And clearly there's benefits to both. Conventionally, it's all about going broad, but it's all about expertise and just really understanding your area. And certainly, having spent a lot more time in the area that I paddle down on the south coast of the of England, I've learned a huge amount during this period, which I wouldn't have done if I was just sort of pinballing everywhere else. So no, I absolutely get that. How about you, Reuben?
I think if obviously from now on it will probably always be, well, until Izzy gets a teenager and doesn't want to do anything with us, but it'll be a family adventure. But we'd like to do. It's probably more cold climates, probably Norway, Scotland,
Mm-hmm.
or it could be even colder than that if we manage to get our gear sorted out. Iceland, Greenland, those sort of places are really just sort of amazing adventure potential to have. But then, when I go to plan those routes, I will have to up my game with the planning, understanding, speak to the local paddle community, really research my local weather patterns, because I'm a bit of a, I know weathers and how they move and tides and all this sort of stuff. So I'll feel out of my comfort zone there. So, and definitely from a family point of view, you want to make sure you're fully on it. But yeah, if I was abroad, probably those sort of places, I would say, yeah, that would be my next step.
Fabulous.
It's a really funny one, isn't it? Because it's for me, it's about I just kind of love the experience, and it sometimes doesn't really matter where it is, because whatever happens, it's always going to be a bit challenging. You've got to paddle at a certain distance, and if you're in a cold climate, you've got to deal with the cold climate. But if you say, right, I'm going to paddle from one end of the country to the other, like Lizzie Carr did, it's whoever does it, it's going to be a challenge, and weather will happen, which will make it the adventure. And so kind of, I don't know, you just got to feel that I've got to just feel that I'm pushing myself a little bit to widen my comfort zone. I just get a bit addicted to that. And yeah,
that is the only problem. That is the problem you have to warn people. If you haven't done a SUP adventure yet, when you start off obviously small and comfortable and plan your route and all that sort of stuff, and do it local to the area so you feel confident. But then when you start, you will be addicted and you will do more, and you will go more and more and more and more, which is amazing. But it's the start of a different lifestyle that you will just be ready for. Let me just say, you will have more boards than you imagine. You will have more tents than you imagine, and that will be the start of an amazing.
Yeah. I think I could have 5 or 6 different touring boards for different type of touring, and which is scary.
And we've already talked about making a custom touring board, because I don't know if we should talk about this yet, but we're not even, the market we still think has got a massive potential having these really performance custom touring boards where you put the kit inside, a bit more like a sea kayak. You're sitting lower down, you're standing lower down in the board. And me and Will keep bandering. If we had more time, we'd probably try and shape one ourselves. But yeah, that's the sort of thing I think which hasn't happened yet in the SUP market. We are going to see some extraordinary developments away from this traditional board basic shape, put your kit on top, to something which actually you transport your kit in. You'll still stand up paddleboarding it, it'll still be the same size, but it would mean you could paddle in more conditions, harder conditions, and paddle faster for longer.
Well, I can speak on behalf of Nick to say that we'd be more than happy to review that for you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so there we go. So and I think there's a lot of technology out there that's used, cross Atlantic trips and all of the sort of canoe and kayak touring that could definitely be used on SUP. So sounds very exciting. Good stuff, guys. Well, we're up against time here. Really, really appreciate all of your expertise and advice. And obviously, we're going to have a whole load of links in the show notes through to all the videos and the various explainers and how-tos that we've mentioned as part of this episode. Where can we find you online, guys?
Best just type in SUPboarder on Google. It will come up. SUPboardermag.com is the official website. We're on YouTube. We're on Instagram. Will can tell you all the social links.
At SUPboarder Mag is the the Instagram, Facebook handle, whatever we call them these days. YouTube, SUPboarder Mag. Just make sure you click subscribe, because YouTube's really good at telling you when we put new stuff out.
Yeah.
And sign up to if you get onto supboardermag.com, sign up to our newsletter, because we push out quite a lot of newsletters for SUPboarder and SUPboarder Pro. So there's loads of ways that you can connect with us.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for your time, guys. It's been a real experience, and you've certainly inspired me to go out, I think, to start with, on a micro overnight adventure. I think I can just get one in before winter arrives. Thanks so much, and look forward to catching up with you soon.
Yeah, great, Simon.
Thanks for having us on.
Cheers.